Happy Thursday Night Football. I'm Alex Baker, and I'm joined today by Kyle Dvorchak with Awesemo.com. Kyle, how are you doing today, man?
I'm doing good. It's a tradition as old as time. Jacksonville playing on Thursday night, and this might actually be the one change where it could be a fun game. Jacksonville, it feels like Jacksonville, Tennessee is like the quintessential miserable Thursday night game. A little Minshew mania. I mean, this is arguably the best quarterback they've had in a long time. Fitzpatrick, maybe not good, but at least fun. Like, this could be a difference maker in terms of being a fun Jacksonville game as opposed to just a trash Thursday game for Jacksonville.
I agree. I think this one could be a good one. I saw a bunch of hype about what facial hair is going to be the best between Gardner Minshew and Fitzmagic. So got some good narratives going into it. I mean, actually, two teams with some interesting talent. We do have DJ Shark out today, so that's one exciting player that unfortunately is not playing tonight. He's really the only inactive that we have. As a result, D.D. Westbrook is active tonight, so that's the only news. So pretty much we've been operating with all this news from the beginning today, so we should have a good read on situations. Well, so let's talk about what we've been seeing in the past few showdown slates. So, what have you seen recently? I know we had a good Vegas versus New Orleans game on Monday.
Yeah, I would say there's been a few things. I think I talked about this on one of my other showdown shows, but the 2-4 lineup has done all right, and I would imagine good relative to the ownership it's seeing, because that's something that doesn't crop up very often. But I think people would be pretty hesitant to play a captain and only one player on the same team. But it's done all right in our first 2 weeks, and it's something that not only has it done decently, but I'm sure it's done way better relative to how many people are going to play it. And I think it's pretty simple, just that sometimes when a team gets absolutely rolled, it's a good chance for one guy on their team to just rack up fantasy points, even, despite the fact their team's not doing particularly well. So that's done well. We've seen mostly the normal distribution of captains. It's been a lot of running back recently, but it's generally running back is a good captain position. And even I think it might have only been one winning lineup that saw a quarterback at captain. I believe that was Cam Newton. And that falls into the trend of quarterbacks with rushing upside being the good quarterbacks to play as captain, because of course they can throw a handful of touchdowns to their guys, but they can also create some of their own value that doesn't get distributed to their offense. So I would say some of the trends we've seen from previous years have mostly fallen in line. I think you've talked about how the value on like kicker defense hasn't been quite as good. And we haven't seen any explosion games, I don't think, from any of the island game kickers or defenses. So no surprise there that those guys are not really awfully exciting. And maybe the one final thing I could talk about is we've seen, I believe, 63% of overs hit in the NFL. Generally in games with overs, you want to spend more of your salary. I'm more comfortable, I don't want to say going chalk, but just trying to at least fill all of my roster spots with good plays, not as quite contrarian. And I'm definitely moving away from kickers and mostly defenses in that scenario, looking to get two quarterbacks as long as it's affordable. So generally, if we're going to bet sides of these games, overs have smashed. So you kind of want to play. I would say we probably want to play for most games, at least a slight majority of games, to be overs until the NFL course corrects, or Vegas, I guess, course corrects.
Well, I mean, they're pretty good at course correcting. So if there was any trend, I think they've caught on to it. Last year, all the unders were hitting because there was this new pass interference rule, and people really didn't anticipate how that would affect the totals because a bunch of touchdowns kept getting called back. So it takes a little bit to adjust, but I think you never know what's going to happen in this game. Two intriguing offenses and two defenses that are probably a little bit below average, not anything to be scared of. So I think we could see some fireworks, definitely some point potential here. Should be a good one. The one thing I've noticed is the troll touchdowns. So on Monday, we had Alec Ingold get a touchdown, and then Jalen Richard got a touchdown at the very end. He actually made the optimal, I believe, and that really swung a ton of money. So I'm sure a lot of people were tilting about that. But tonight, it feels like with Shark out, we got a lot of good values. So it might not be that hard to pick out someone that's cheap that has a pretty good shot at putting up points. I mean, we saw it with the guy on the Steelers last Thursday. His name is the Browns. That's escaping me right now, but
Was it
200.
Kadarrell Hodge? Was that the?
Hodge.
Yeah.
Yes. Yeah. He was our big $200 guy or
Mhm.
1,000 or whatever, and he had a pretty good game. We got some tonight for you guys, so that should be good. Guys, before we get into our plays tonight, make sure to click that thumbs up. If you haven't already subscribed, make sure to hit the subscribe button. Appreciate that. We also have a new thing on Awesemo.com with the Express membership. So the Express membership has been around for a while, but I've been really trying to up it this season to provide more value, because I know a lot of you guys out there are playing a few lineups, and paying $50 a month is a lot if you're only entering a few lineups a night. So the Express Pass it includes all of our Showdown content right now, from projections, ownership, and the top Showdown players tool. So that's a little icing on the cake. We have the big board. We have a lot of premium articles throughout the week, and my rankings for letter grades instead of number of projections. So make sure to check those out. Express is only $3.95 a week, so that's less than a cup of coffee.
Not the coffee I'm buying, baby. I buy that good stuff.
Well, wait. That exactly. So it is less than that, I imagine, because I know I don't even want to say what coffee drinks I'm buying, so I probably get.
You buying something a little 7-8 bougie? Could you get 2 Express memberships for your cup of coffee?
Man, maybe I could. All right, well, let's talk about the game. So we got the Jaguars. Shark is out, so that's big news. Let's talk about Minshew, because, man, his game 1 was off the charts. He hit 95% of his passes. I mean, he was pretty good last year. It looks like he's gotten a lot better this year. And as far as expectations going into the season, I think he's really surpassed them so far. So what do you make of Minshew so far?
Yeah, Minshew's been, I think last year he played well, and especially given the context of him not entering the league as a starter, it was kind of surprising to see him not almost fall flat. He wasn't drafted highly. There weren't any expectations for him to be the starter, and he still came in and played well. But it has been, albeit in a small sample, an incredible step up in this second season for him. I believe 3 touchdowns in both of his first 2 games, and dating back to last year, I think it's 3 in a row of 3 touchdowns. He's played well. He's been super efficient. Like you said, 19 of 20 in game 1 was incredible. I think the most interesting thing maybe is that they have spread the ball out to a number of guys. It hasn't really showed up in like the DJ Chark box score. It hasn't showed up in any of these guys really exploding. They've gone to different guys at every point. We've seen like James O'Shaughnessy had a decent game last week. Tyler Eifert finally showed up. Keelan Cole surprisingly leads this team in targets. So although his efficiency has helped this offense without a doubt, it is definitely not brought one player to light more than any others. And I believe he has 19 rushing yards in both of his first 2 games. And he was a rusher in his first NFL season. He's not on that level of Kyler Murray, but he has also, has some potential with his legs. And maybe if you're looking to, I know he's a guy who we talk about getting in captain, or we're going to. He's a guy who I think I'm not generally looking in like large field tournaments to play quarterbacks and captain, but he'd be a guy who would make sense to do it because they are so spread out. It could very well be that we see 2 different passers catch touchdowns, and then Minshew puts in one with his legs. So I think of all captains, he's kind of a guy that I feel much more confident than I would with like a Drew Brees at captain, or one of these guys who just doesn't give anything with his legs.
Definitely. I mean, I think he can add a few points on the ground. I have him for about 3 fantasy points rushing. And if he gets more than that, I mean, that's the difference between Keelan Cole being the highest scorer and Gardner Minshew. So I think that makes a big difference, even though 3 points is seemingly insignificant just because of that captain spot. So I agree. Minshew, he makes a fine captain. I just updated our Showdown top plays tool, which gives you probabilities that each player will be the highest scoring on the slate. I have him at the best odds at 28%, projected to be on 22%. He's also the most expensive guy on the slate. So it's not any secret that this guy has some fantasy value, especially like today, man. The Jaguars are projected for 26 points. That's insane for the Jags. So whatever you thought about the Jags going into the season, throw it out here. Now, let's talk about their wideouts a little bit. As you mentioned, Keelan Cole has been getting the most targets so far of the group, which is pretty surprising. The snap counts so far this season, Shark was at 86%, Cole 75%, Chenault 57%, Conley 39%, and Colin Johnson 12%. So 86% for Shark. Now that leaves a lot of routes open for new receivers, and D.D. Westbrook is active for this game. He's been inactive up to this point, maybe a dart throw play. But how are you ranking these Jacksonville receivers?
So just in terms of raw projection, I still expect Keelan Cole to be the number one guy, but I think it is more of a 1A, 1B at best with Laviska. But it does seem like, based on our ownership projections, people are quite excited about Laviska Shenault. I get it. He's a fun, exciting player, but in terms of strategy, if people are going to go overlooking or at least looking for Laviska Shenault to be the number one over Keelan Cole in terms of ownership, I'm probably just going to go with Keelan Cole as my guy in terms of who I project to be the number one. I don't feel confident in that, but it seems like the markets at least feel a bit more confident that would be Laviska. He's a guy who maybe the allure to him is that rushing production, because he's gotten a handful of carries and he's looked pretty solid on those carries through his first two games. But for me, that adds what do you have him projected at in terms of rushing line? I would say maybe you can give him 2 or less points in terms of rushing production. It's not like he is, I don't know, who even does, like Cordell Patterson. He's not Cordell Patterson, I guess, as a rusher. I guess he's more as a receiver. I still have Keelan Cole 1, Laviska 2. I would put Conley at 3. I think the only thing that makes me excited about D.D. Westbrook is the 200 price tag. And because he was a late active, he hasn't played yet, and he's like a late active, essentially, not a late inactive, he's probably going to go so unowned relative to the fact that he needs one catch to pay off. So in terms of price, he's a guy who I have to be interested in.
I'm glad to hear you say that, because I had a little bit of Westbrook in best ball, so I'm hoping that he can actually play today. Yeah, I agree with you completely about Shenault, because, man, like, people have been talking about Laviska Shenault nonstop today, and I actually do have him projected like 0.5 points less than Keelan Cole. As you mentioned, like, based on that rushing production, he adds a couple points. He has rushed 7 times in the first 2 games, so that is significant, and it's just not something we see a lot in the NFL. I think people are pretty excited about that, kind of this unique player. The only thing is he's not like amazing at running the ball or at receiving the ball. He's been targeted 8 times so far over the first 2 games. So I think there is reason to not be like so stoked about Shenault. And like, I mean, the hype is like off the charts. So I think he's a good play, but maybe a little overhyped. So I'm a little hesitant to like fully recommend him, I guess. And then at tight end, we got Tyler Eifert. He was tight end 1 for the Jags. O'Shaughnessy rotates in, and then there's this guy Ben Ellefson who plays a few snaps, running routes a game. So do you have any interest in the tight ends for Jacksonville here?
Yeah, I believe last week Tyler Eifert either led or was like tied or second on the team in air yards. He went down the field a little bit. He's a guy who I'm not like awfully surprised that they're not going to give him the entirety of the load. He's old and he has been injured in almost every single NFL season. And that leaves some opening for James O'Shaughnessy. Tyler Eifert, clearly the number 1 tight end on this team. And maybe another way you leverage this Laviska popularity, and obviously not having DJ Chark does free up some targets. Not sure many of them would actually funnel to Tyler Eifert. Maybe we could see them run 2 tight end sets a little more as well. So O'Shaughnessy could be in play. I think O'Shaughnessy's price is fair, and it's worth having him in your player pool. Eifert, a guy I'm probably just lukewarm on. I don't know if you could really see him have a dominant game, but in this game where you're going to see it so spread out, maybe he doesn't need to necessarily.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, you don't need every guy to get 15 points or something. Eifert, he's got a solid kind of solid upside. So, I mean, he's running routes on 65% of the snaps, 7 targets so far. That's not terribly inspiring, but it's not bad for tight end. So I think Eifert's worth some looks. Now, the running backs for the Jags, actually both teams are pretty interesting. But the Jags, James Robinson, the coach, was hyping him up to start the year. And then James Robinson actually has kind of delivered so far. He rushed 18 times in the first game, 17 in the second game. So that provides a lot of fantasy value. He also has been targeted 5 times. So, he's been pegged as a workhorse back, and he's getting a workhorse role, which is crazy because this guy's an undrafted rookie. So what have you made of James Robinson so far?
Yeah, it doesn't blow my mind that he's a guy who is getting, like, he is, in week 1, I believe they didn't have another running back get a single carry. In week 2, I want to say Chris Thompson had 2 carries maybe. It is not unsurprising that he is getting all of the running back carries and that he's probably not getting a ton of targets on a weekly basis. I believe he was Illinois State FCS school, 364 carries, and I want to say 1,900 yards in his final season. He's a guy who can physically handle the workload. And because he's a running back who doesn't catch passes, if he's going to have a good game, it probably comes at the expense, or at least doesn't certainly help, the teammates that he has. So I think he makes a really interesting captain spot. And I know in the tool you're talking about, our top showdown tool, he's a guy who, based on his odds of being the captain, is probably not getting the credit he deserves. We've seen him. He has 20 carry upside. Jacksonville favored in this game too, which they haven't been in the past 2 games. So I think Robinson is probably a really interesting play, given that it seems like the quarterbacks are going to garner a ton of ownership, probably rightfully so at the captain spot, but maybe that's taking away a bit from Robinson, who I actually am probably going to be over the field on in captain. I think he has 100-yard touchdown upside in a game that, if the under hits, that will absolutely be the winning captain spot, or at least very well could be.
Nice, man. Yeah, I think Robinson's a solid play. I mean, he has averaged 17 fantasy points a game over these first 2, so he'll probably be popular as well. But as you're mentioning, that rushing upside is really valuable, like particularly in the captain spot. So I'd say he's one of the top captain options today. I like James Robinson a lot. Let's talk about Chris Thompson, because he's a guy that, when he's been healthy, he's been electric, receiving passes out of the backfield and maybe running a few times a game. So far this season, you have to describe his fantasy performance as somewhat underwhelming at 7 points a game. In the last game, he got 4 targets. He ran the ball twice. So not a high percentage play, but do you see value in Chris Thompson here?
Yeah, I'm not super high on Chris Thompson. He'd probably only come into my lineups really in like Jag stacks. And I guess he would make sense if you were building, like, if you have him in a lineup that has the Jags losing, essentially. Whether or not that means you're still captaining them, I don't think is incredibly important. But just if you have a lineup built on the projection that the Jags lose, he would be the guy, given the clear split to James Robinson, not much of a pass catching back, and Chris Thompson literally at this point in his career, unfortunately, because I agree, he's kind of like efficient when even on his carries. We're just not seeing the carries. They're almost non-existent. James Robinson projecting for like 80 to 90% of the backfield carries outside of Laviska Shenault and Gardner Minshew. So I think you have to play him specifically where you see them basically trailing and passing a lot. Otherwise, not awfully interested, but I still think he's worth considering. And we saw he has like a touchdown upside, given that he's getting a little bit, I believe, of red zone looks. The one touchdown he had was a really sick wheel route that Gardner Minshew lofted into him. So I don't think he's a bad play, but he is only in a specific scenario that I am really interested in him.
Definitely, yeah. I mean, he's a really interesting talent, and it's not going to pay off a lot. As you mentioned, he can get those fancy touchdowns. So if he does, he'll definitely be in the winning lineup at his price. So I think you probably want one of these guys as a dart throw kind of play in each lineup at least, because otherwise you're going to be duplicating so many times. So Chris Thompson could be a good, like, change the pace DFS play, you could say. As you're saying, he might be a guy you'd want to play with more Miami players, because he might see the field more trailing. So that's something to consider. Although in a neutral game script, he'll probably do fine too. All right, let's talk about no house advantage. Prop betting is really taking off right now. I saw the other night someone bet $250K on Marcus Smart to score over 13 points. He got 10. Now, the problem is, if you're betting against the house, like, they're taking a big cut. We know in DFS it's a lot more profitable to play against other people, your Joe Schmoes. So no house advantage is the place to bet props against other people. They have DFS style contests, except you just pick props instead of players. So you can get $23 too if you use the promo code Awesemo, and I never mind some extra dead presidents in my e-wallet. So make sure to check out No House Advantage. Now, let's talk about some props real quick. What is your favorite prop bet tonight on No House Advantage, and also just on betting sportsbooks?
So I looked at the number earlier, and I'm not sure exactly what the number is, but I like me some Ryan Fitzpatrick overs. I know we had it was one of our Twitter accounts. I think it's Awesemo_com, was that we're giving away one of our passes if you choose. I believe it's more passing yards between him and Minshew was our personal prop. I like a handful of Ryan Fitzpatrick overs. I think his passing yards, if they're going to be trailing, this is a team that doesn't seem very committed to one running back, let alone running the ball at all. So I can see Ryan Fitzpatrick having a pretty solid day, even if his team doesn't necessarily win. I think the Ryan Fitzpatrick overs on the yards and both No House Advantage and just generally is a guy that I'm probably going to be betting a decent amount of overs on. I know he's a guy that we have as one of the top projected plays as well, unsurprisingly, because he's a quarterback. But I do like Ryan Fitzpatrick anytime he's trailing.
Yeah, I mean, Fitzpatrick, he has really good upside just because he has no problem just throwing the ball. Or chucking the ball. I mean, I guess I should say he's the opposite of a game manager quarterback. So I think he's always exciting to watch. That's why they call him Fitzmagic. I kind of like the No House Advantage over of 0.5 interceptions. They don't have they don't usually, when you bet that sportsbook, it's like minus 175 because throwing an interception is a lot more likely for a guy like Fitzpatrick than not throwing an interception. So that would be my bet. I know House Advantage on DraftKings and other sports books. I really like this under of 39.5 rushing yards for Myles Gaskin. We'll get into the Miami guys a lot, but I feel like there's not really a lot of clarity in this backfield. Gaskin has been their number one back so far, much to the chagrin of guys who have drafted Jordan Howard and Matt Breida. But I don't know if we can count on him for 40. I mean, that's basically like expecting him to run 10 times on average. So that's a lot in a crowded backfield. Let's go jump into the Dolphins here. Pretty healthy team. We got Devontae Parker, who is questionable in weeks 1 and 2. I believe he was taken off the injury report, so that was an encouraging sign. Mike Gesicki, he's been kind of the guy everyone's been talking about on Twitter because he's been running routes on a ridiculous number of snaps for a tight end. So that's someone we'll talk about. But who's really standing out to you as far as guys to pair up with Fitzpatrick?
Yeah, I like Gesicki a lot. Like seeing a crazy, I believe it's like top 5 target share and air yard share among tight ends. A guy who goes downfield, is incredibly athletic. His combine numbers put him like the 99th percentile, and he's seeing volume. My only question would be, and I'll throw this back to you because I genuinely want your opinion. Would you consider playing a guy like Mike Gesicki at captain, specifically because we don't see very many tight ends come in as the best captain play? It happens quite rarely. And I believe the 2 most recent times, like in the middle of last year, Kittle did it, and Travis Kelce did it, I believe, on one of the playoff slates. Other than that, it generally doesn't happen. Almost happened with Darren Waller, although I think the winning lineups generally had Kamara. So he's a guy who, I don't want to say he can be on that Travis Kelce tier, but he could push into that Darren Waller tier, just racking up a ton of volume. And on a game that it doesn't have, anytime you play Travis Kelce, you are foregoing Tyreek Hill. You're not foregoing a Tyreek Hill level talent when you're playing Mike Gesicki in this game specifically. There's no smash spots. The closest we would have is like a Devontae Parker or James Robinson. I'm not entirely sure. So I think your opportunity cost is probably a lot lower in this case when you're playing a tight end at captain. So I don't hate him there. I'm still not entirely sure how in love I am with that, though.
Yeah, I think he's a great captain. He has been really performing well so far this year to a ridiculous extent. I mean, he's averaged, 18 fantasy points per game so far. So I'm kind of thinking that Gesicki will be really, really popular at captain, and I think that he's a good play. He has been targeted at 25% of his routes. that's a little bit of an outlier. I'd expect that to come down a little bit, but actually, in week 1, he ran routes on 82% of plays. On week 2, 59%. So I think there might be variance from week to week on that. I think that Jasicki is a pretty good captain, but I kind of think based on this 18 points per game, he's going to be really high owned. And maybe Devontae Parker and Preston Williams will come in with much lower ownership. Preston Williams, he's only averaged 5.9 fantasy points per game, so he hasn't really gotten it going. But he's run routes on 91% of snaps so far. How are you feeling about Preston Williams? Do you think he can bounce back this week?
Yeah, I don't hate Preston Williams. I don't hate any of the guys. I'm not in love with Devontae Parker necessarily, and it's been a small sample, but he is tied for the 3rd place on his team in targets, not even behind Preston Williams, which may be the most interesting thing. The second on the team in targets is Isaiah Ford at 14 targets, and none of these guys have been crazy efficient. Devontae Parker leads all of the non-Mike Gesicki guys in yards at 100. Only one of them has scored outside of Mike Gesicki. So maybe that has me looking more towards Preston Williams, just because if you're going to get the price and the ownership discount, I would just rather, seeing that they're getting a similar target share, look to a guy like Preston Williams. You could even look deeper and get some serious savings by going to Isaiah Ford, who is like, out of the 3 guys, been at least the most impressive relative to for Ford. It was like 0 expectations for him. So I really like Ford at his price. I don't hate Parker, but he would probably come in terms of my ownership, probably similar to a guy like Preston Williams. He's more expensive, and I would still say like our prior from last year should be stronger than a 2-game sample. But the sample does have me a little bit worried that Devontae Parker isn't going to be this dominant alpha receiver. And really, all the way up until last year, throughout his career, he was absolutely not that. He was like an iconic draft bust that Miami beat reporters hyped every year. Finally, the hype pays off last year, but I think it is more likely that this offense is not quite as concentrated on Parker as they were last year. So that has me interested in Ford and in Preston Williams. I don't hate Parker. I just think that the target share early in the season has to be a bit concerning.
Yeah, I think Ford is a pretty interesting value play. As you're saying, he's been getting a lot of targets. He has 14 over the first 2 games. He's run routes on 78% of plays. So he's out there getting targeted while he's out there. I mean, there's really no reason he should be 4,500 other than maybe he hasn't gotten touchdowns, which for wide receivers is really random. So I am actually like kind of high on Parker, and here's what I'm seeing in my data here. A lot of this is based on Pro Football Focus. They provide all these routes run information. On week 1, Parker was questionable. He ran routes on only 32% of plays. So I'm thinking injury really played into that. Week 2, he ran routes on 91% of plays. So I'm thinking that he is fully back week 2. 90% is a lot closer to what we should expect going forward. And he's been targeted 20% of the time when he's been running a route, which is above average. So I'm thinking that he's definitely someone I have pegged for maybe bouncing back. And I'm hoping he can do it. I mean, I might be partial based on having him on some fantasy teams here. So I think there's reason maybe to expect maybe a bounce back from his week 1 and 2 performance. Are you seeing any other guys that might be worth looking at? Jakeem Grant, Lynn Bowden, pretty low usage guys, it looks like.
I think, was Lynn Bowden announced as inactive along with the Navy quarterback, wide receiver, running back, whatever they want to call him? Maybe that puts you on, because we saw Lynn Bowden got a target, played like, I think 4 or 5 snaps last week, and I'm pretty sure, I can double check, but I'm pretty sure I saw him announced as inactive. So maybe that puts a guy like Jakeem Grant, who, yeah, not getting much usage, but if that 1 target and a handful of snaps goes to him, he's 1,400, a guy that maybe you consider, especially if you're building 150. So I think with Lynn Bowden now, maybe that goes to Jakeem Grant, but it's such a small edge to be talking about that he gets 4 extra snaps or whatever.
Yeah, you're right. Lynn Bowden is he is out today, so my bad on that. I'm updating projections.
Are you removing his 0.1 catch projection or whatever? Like,
yeah.
I think he played 4 snaps last week. He got a target, and I also think he got negative yards on that target, if I remember correctly. So
that might be why he's inactive. That makes sense. I think that does bolster Jakeem Grant a little bit, but usually it's not worth diving that deep.
Mm-hmm.
I think our consensus is. So maybe like if you're really trying to get this 300K first prize, that Jakeem Grant could be a valuable piece, but in any other tournament, probably wouldn't advise him. Now let's talk about the running backs, because everyone was expecting Howard and Breida to be the pairing in the backfield, and they're going to split the carries, except like that didn't even happen a single week. Basically, right from the get-go, Myles Gaskin was getting most of the snaps. Now, it is a little bit situation dependent. Myles Gaskin has run routes on 58% of snaps. When it comes to actual rushing attempts, it's more divided between them. So how do you break down this running back situation in Miami?
Yeah, it's a little interesting. Breida came up a bit in week 2 specifically. I think his week 1 was a bit more disappointing. It was like 5 carries. He saw 7 carries, 2 targets in week 2. Maybe they're trying to get him more involved. I would still have my lean as Gaskins being the leader of a miserable committee. And the only, I think Jordan Howard is almost entirely a bad play, except he's gotten I think a bulk of the red zone work. I think it's 5 red zone touches to 3 and 2 for the other players, maybe even 3 and 0. I can pull it up. I wrote about it in my Showdown article. So I am really nervous that I am going to play any amount of Breida or Gaskin, who in all respects are going to be better outright plays. And then Jordan Howard comes in for 2 red zone plays and scores once would be truly miserable. And that's my only concern with not going more excited about Breida, who's fairly cheap, and Gaskins, who's getting a ton of targets. I believe he has 11 targets on the season. A handful of those came last week. Those guys seem like far better plays to me, but Howard getting the red zone work says he is not entirely dead yet. And I imagine people are going to treat him that way. Not entirely sure what to make of this backfield. I think that is probably the most salient point I can make, though, is Howard getting the leading amount of red zone work really has me nervous that he is going to be the random touchdown player we're talking about tomorrow.
Yeah, I mean, that is always a concern when you got a big running back like Howard who can't catch passes, is that's why he's on the team, is to get those goal line runs in. So that is a big concern. Myles Gaskin is I think he is a good play, because I feel like as far as name brand, Howard and Breida are the name brands on the team. Gaskin is the new Patrick Laird, basically, or Kalen Ballage, where Miami's running backs have just been so bad. And I don't think people are really going to give him any credit until he really blows up. But I think he could be a little bit under the radar. Even though if we are looking at the snap counts, Gaskin has been playing the most snaps by a lot. So what about defense and special teams? The kicker for Jacksonville is Josh Lambo is out. He's got a sub in today. So you guys probably saw that when drafting that. Lambo's on the injured reserve. Brandon Wright is their kicker. And then Miami, they have Jason Sanders. So any love for special teams here?
Yeah, I will say I with the high total, it's probably not the best play to go to defenses, but I'm really interested in any time I can play a defense against Ryan Fitzpatrick. He's thrown, I believe, multiple interceptions in 30% of his games or something like that. He's been sacked multiple times in about a third of his games as well. Iconically, a guy whose lows are so incredibly low that he can replace Jameis Winston and then get re-benched after replacing Jameis Winston. That's the thing that happened for him. He also, I think he got benched for Josh Rosen at some point last year. And then he came back and played well, probably because of his aggression. But that aggression also gives him these comically low floors. And those are things that I also think are on him, and they're not defenses are forcing him to make dumb mistakes. That's a thing that is probably just inherent in his nature of play. So despite the fact that Jacksonville's defense has been just gutted in the past few years, they're quite expensive on the slate, but I also don't think they're going to be quite highly owned. Ryan Fitzpatrick, if there's any quarterback that is not, that is starting, Jameis Winston would be the guy. But if there's any quarterback who can do their best Jameis Winston impression and give the other team a touchdown, you have to say it's Ryan Fitzpatrick. So I like the Jacksonville defense. They're quite priced up, a bit surprising to me, but I don't think they're going to be particularly highly owned. If you're building 150, I don't hate them at captain. I don't love defense at captain, but I do think anytime you can play Ryan Fitzpatrick, that is a massive edge for a defense. On the other side, Minshew has been efficient to a point where I really can't find myself getting too interested in Dolphins defense.
Yeah, I think the Jags defense versus Fitzpatrick. I mean, you said it. Like, Fitzpatrick just throws picks. Like, that's his calling card. Like, if you look at all Fitzpatrick's other stats besides interception percentage, he doesn't look like a terrible quarterback. But there's a reason he keeps being backups like everywhere and never really. I mean, for fantasy, he's so amazing. Like, he'll get like 30, 40 points a game on a good day. So, like, definitely a guy that is like, you either want him or you want the opposing defense. I mean, that might be oversimplifying it a lot, but I think he's always a guy you want to pick defenses against. And if Jacksonville is on the waiver wire in your fantasy league, that'd be a great option to stream today. Miami is projected for 23 points, Jacksonville for 26. So as you said, a pretty high scoring game. So maybe that leads us a little bit away from the defense, special teams. Do you have any love for the kickers here?
Yeah, not a ton of love. I think it depends on how you view, like, especially as you said, like, you know, Vegas isn't going to get beaten by these overs for very much longer, if at all. It very well could just be something they've ironed out. So if you see two offenses that have, especially with the Dolphins, actually I'm into Minshew, but especially with the Dolphins, when you look, if this game is going to hit an under, I would say that really is where you consider the defenses in play. Brandon Wright, I'm not like, he's a kicker. He literally has nothing to learn when he steps into a team. So I'm not concerned that I believe the team signed him on Wednesday. He's a guy who's relatively cheap for a kicker. I think we've seen kickers kind of get priced up this year and just since the beginning of Showdown. So as far as kickers, I'm not generally excited. I would say Wright's kind of in play, and he does fall on the right side of the total or of the, you know, the spread. I'd rather have my kicker, all things considered, be on the team scoring more points. So for me, Wright, probably not a bad play at kicker. I'm generally not as excited on defenses and kickers as I am on the Jacksonville side this week. So it's a bit interesting for me and how I'm going to be building.
Yeah, I think that getting some Wright, like, maybe people will be a little bit afraid to click that name because he's a backup kicker. But in all likelihood, they're going to think, you know, along the same lines as just like a kicker, like they just hit field goals. So, like, it doesn't really matter that it's a new team. So I think that, like, generally kickers are priced a little bit below 2x. So they usually make good value plays. Is there any like particular lineup construction that you'd want to play defense or you'd want to play a kicker? Like, how would that affect who else you put in your lineup?
The most clear one for me is James Robinson. I would say out of all the plays, I'm not sure if anybody on the Miami, I guess it would be Jordan Howard, but I just cannot find myself getting too much into Jordan Howard. On the other side, Robinson, quite obviously a guy who derives most of his value, if not like the entirety of his value, from simply carrying the ball. And if his team's going to be in a lead, I think it's to play him in a game that's competitive. Really, the only scenario is if I think Miami's going to boat race them, which I don't see happening. So for me, Robinson is the clear correlation with his team defense. And on the Miami side, there's really not much. Both Breida and Gaskin are guys who, I mean, they have some rushing upside, but you really would be interested in them as pass catchers. You know, Breida dating back to his time in San Francisco, and Gaskin through 2 weeks with the 11 targets. Both of those guys don't seem to correlate much, if at all, with the defense. Maybe you could say Gaskin just as the lead back. Generally, all things held equal, you would want your lead back to have a better game script. But Robinson is the obvious correlation for me, and it makes a lot of sense.
Yeah, that makes sense, that getting the Jags D in Robinson. I think one interesting like play you could make is you got a guy on the other side with Gaskin that he's been running a ton of routes out of the backfield. So, like, do you try to target like a Robinson and then add Gaskin kind of like because they're in the same game script if Jacksonville is going to be up?
Yeah, I was thinking about that as you were saying it with the defense in perspective. I'm typically, not always, but typically looking to target either pass catchers, running backs, any position really, but guys who I think if I'm playing the defense, because obviously you can't play all of the same team. If I'm playing, say, the Jacksonville defense in this example, I definitely want guys who can simply rack up catches, because that is typically, if you're down, you're going to be passing a lot. So guys who can just catch a ton of passes don't necessarily need to score touchdowns as well, because if I'm playing on the Jacksonville defense being good, I don't think there are going to be many touchdowns on the Miami side. So if you don't need touchdowns to really accrue your value, and Gaskins is a great example, I think maybe you could say like a Ford would fall into that range as well, or Gesicki, but Gaskin being the running back we'd look at. Yeah, I think Gaskin and the Jacksonville defense make some sense in terms of like, obviously Jacksonville defense negatively correlates to the overall output of Miami, but you can't just run Jacksonville players. So yeah, Gaskins would make a lot of sense, even Breida to an extent too. So those guys, and obviously I talked about Robinson correlating with Jacksonville. So by the same measure, Robinson and the opposing pass catching running backs does make a decent amount of sense.
Nice. Yeah, I think that it could, obviously in Showdown, like the correlations are huge and putting a lot of emphasis on the roster construction and who you're pairing together. Kind of by that same logic, maybe Chris Thompson, but they don't have one guy you can count on to rush the ball in Miami. Like, yeah, I think
that's what I was thinking about too.
It's like
yeah.
Howard, like I can't recommend that, like honestly. So, maybe if you want to get really creative, I guess. All right, guys. So we need some more likes in here. We're very sensitive guys, and we can't give our best analysis unless we have that positive feedback from the community. So
yeah,
you can click that thumbs up, and then if you're not already subscribed to the channel, hit the subscribe, hit the notification bell. Appreciate it. We got a question in chat from Caesar. He says no one's talking about Tua. I mean, is that something you consider? I thought I heard he wasn't like being tackled in practice or something. So like,
quarterback shouldn't be tackled in practice. Don't tackle your quarterback in practice. It's practice. In the words of Iverson, it's just practice. No, I mean, if you're playing, second quarter and fourth quarter, I wonder if there would be any edge. Obviously, it only happens if Fitzpatrick gets hurt or benched. But if you're just like, are there people just like pre-setting lineups for second and second half, fourth quarter? Otherwise, obviously not. Definitely not playing Tua. Tua's awesome, and I like him more than Fitzpatrick. But if he's not playing, he's not playing.
yeah, he should be fun when he plays. Maybe if we get word, second half contest. If there's a last minute quarterback change because Fitzpatrick throws 2 interceptions in the first half, then you can make a ton of money picking Tua because no one's going to have him. So that would be the play there. I think you're right. Let's talk a little bit about our favorite captains because that's always a fun decision point. I've started to put in some lineups here. So we got a question talking what are the differences between FanDuel or talks on FanDuel. So the big difference for me is I have a lot more quarterback at captain because with half point PPR, it's just a lot harder for a receiver to rack up big fantasy total. And quarterbacks score exactly the same. So all in all, quarterbacks are a lot more likely to be the highest score on FanDuel. I mean, the 0.5 PPR is the big difference. Like, how does that affect your builds on FanDuel?
Yeah, I think you said it. It's really just the quarterback. On DraftKings, I'm rarely, not never, but not quite often playing quarterbacks in captain because they typically do end up carrying a receiver with them and ahead of them, especially given the quarterbacks are the highest price. That is just not true on, with no bonus, no full PPR. I think it is so much more likely, and the numbers obviously back this up, that you want your quarterbacks in your captain spot and running backs too, I would say. So for me, running back specifically, especially a guy like on this list, James Robinson. I mean, he is the FanDuel of all FanDuel players without his pass catching upside, but definitely touchdown upside. So I'd be looking much more confidently to a quarterback at captain and running back as well, just because obviously they would generally benefit from not having to compete with receivers who can catch 10 passes and get full PPR for all of them.
Yeah, definitely. So I think playing the quarterback at captain on DraftKings, you need a lot more specific of a build. On FanDuel, is almost generally like a pretty good, like if not the best option on the slate. So I think that's definitely a big consideration. Now, if you are playing a captain quarterback, how does that affect who else you're putting in your lineup?
Yeah, I'm very clearly just looking to stack guys who not only can put up yardage, but on FanDuel specifically, you have to be finding touchdowns. So whether that means looking for red zone weapons, whether it means looking for, running backs, Chris Thompson can catch passes out of the backfield, I guess. So if I'm looking to stack him with a running back, I definitely want to get a running back who has touchdown potential. I don't think, it's obviously not impossible that a running back makes the optimal lineup without catching a touchdown pass. But that is something I would emphasize, is trying to correlate my touchdowns specifically with my pass catchers. And obviously, I'm just looking to get more of their pass catchers in, because it would be quite rare, unless they're like a supreme rushing quarterback, to see a quarterback get there. Even on FanDuel, where running or receivers aren't getting quite the boost from receptions, it'd still be quite rare to see them get there without getting any touchdowns.
Yeah, definitely. I think that makes a lot of sense. So, yeah. It's all about the correlations, making sure if you're playing the quarterback, like at least one receiver is going to be having a good game. On DraftKings, it's kind of interesting because like you need the quarterback to be the highest scoring because they're most expensive of any player tonight. And that means you probably want to play more than one receiver because you need it to be spread around a good amount. Or, with Minshew, like we've been talking about his rushing upside, that kind of changes the strategy a little bit. But who are your favorite captains tonight, all things considered, on DraftKings?
Yeah, I'm typically not super high, and I guess I'll just talk about it from a tournament perspective, because generally people are playing these sweet tournaments, trying to take home a sweet 300K tonight. Of all slates, I think Gardner Minshew is probably one of the better times I'm more comfortable playing quarterback at captain. We have a slight edge, projected at playing him at captain. I love James Robinson specifically. I don't hate Keelan Cole, especially if it's an interesting leverage spot over Louis Chenault, who, all things considered, just hasn't quite seen the target share to make me confident that he will be the primary beneficiary for any reason from DJ Chark. I don't think he's a bad play, but if people are going to be, just as confident that he could be the best captain as Keelan Cole, I'll just take the discount in like a similar ownership and a literal discount in price. So Keelan Cole, I don't hate there. Looking down a little bit farther, I don't hate going to Isaiah Ford, especially you don't have to do a lot to get over the field on him, but he's a guy who potentially could lead his team in targets, and no one is going to be playing him at captain. I'm not super interested on the Miami running backs. Those are guys I can't get on board with. I don't hate, I think you're swinging me a little bit on Devontae Parker as well, because we did have a lot of last year that says he can be an explosive playmaker, and things have generally trended up from his week one lacking performance to week two. So he's a guy who, as we come in towards, I still got 12 minutes to lock, I'll probably update and maybe get some more of him into my captain spot.
Nice, man. Yeah, I like it. Isaiah Ford, that's kind of an interesting contrarian play, and not many people are going to have him. And then Minshew, of course, top projected player of the slate. You can't go wrong. I got a bunch of James Robinson, because we've talked a lot about how those rushing fantasy production that really is advantageous in the captain spot because no one's sharing it. And then my contrarian pick, I know you like them too, is the Jags defense, because if Fitzpatrick gets in a hole, it could go south real quick. So that's the way I'm playing on DraftKings. And then on FanDuel, I feel like the running back and quarterback are really like the best options by far. Honestly, like I just have three quarterbacks that I'm running pretty much. Three players at MVP.
You are getting Tua in.
Yeah, true. I had to talk everyone off him so that I'd be the only one. But yeah, Minshew, James Robinson, and Fitzpatrick. So that's how I'm going.
None of the guys have the market share that I feel confident. Like, these are two teams that seem so spread out that it really, especially on FanDuel, I can't find myself. If they had an alpha receiver on either of these teams, I would consider playing them at captain. It doesn't seem like we're getting much of that at all.
Yeah, FanDuel's so hard for the receivers to get there, so I think it is a little bit harder on FanDuel to get there at captain. And I don't know if people really adjust for that is the main point.
Mm-hmm.
So, do you ever take a kicker in captain? Because it won once last year.
It did win once. I'm definitely not in this game. Maybe you could convince me in a game with, say, a 40-point total, because I think that was a low total game, or at least it probably hit the under. I think it was a crappy game. It was Matt Prater. I don't remember what the final game score was. Generally, though, that's where I'd look to do it, but I don't imagine myself doing it. Would you consider doing that? It hit once last year. That's also once on a decent amount of a pretty large sample. So maybe it's a solid leverage player of the field, because if it's going to hit once a season and people are going to act as if it hits once a decade, it's worth it. But I don't know what the smart take on that is. I'm probably not doing it.
I agree. I think it's not smart to put kicker and captain. Like, the main thing I'm thinking is that, like, when you're spending that little salary captain, it funnels you into a very specific lineup construction. So it's not like even that like unique of a lineup probably.
Mm-hmm.
But the main thing is, like, it's kind of like an optimizer play where if you treat all players the same, then you're going to end up with a good amount of kicker at captain. And there's a lot of people that just probably don't know what they're doing. They'll like buy really good set projections and not know how to use them. So you got to know how to leverage them properly. And that's going to the positions that are really favorable on the specific sites. So on DraftKings, maybe going to position players more. On FanDuel, going to the quarterbacks and running backs would probably be my preferred option. All right, guys. If you have any questions, hit me up in the premium Slack chat. I'll be checking my mentions for the next few minutes here. Appreciate all the feedback everyone's given me. Like, even if I don't respond every time, but I'll have useful feedback. Like earlier today, someone's like, Josh Lambo is still in the ownership. Like, that helps me correct all the mistakes on the site a lot. So if you have any questions, also check the YouTube chat here. Oviska or Ford on FanDuel asks Sridhar. So Kyle, who do you feel like between Chenault and Isaiah Ford?
I'll go with the pivot and go with Isaiah Ford. I like Laviska Chenault more, and he's essentially a running back, so he's a FanDuel play. No, I'll go with I guess I'll call it a leverage play and go with Isaiah Ford.
Nice, man. I like it because Isaiah Ford, like, if you just look at who's hyped up, Laviska Chenault is like so hyped up, but there's not a whole lot differentiating him and Isaiah Ford as far as like the roles on their team. So I kind of think Ford is a little bit undervalued, and Chenault is kind of the catchy play like that everyone wants to take tonight. So I think Ford is a sneaky play tonight. So estimated Westbrook snaps. So this one is, I feel like there's such a wide range. It's almost hard to predict because, like, obviously, like, throughout the training camp and everything, they like practice sets with the receivers, each having like their own different routes. So, and I don't like have an in-depth knowledge enough about the team to really say. So I kind of went, I think I put him in for like 30 or 40% of snaps because he's kind of bottom of the pecking order. How are you feeling about Westbrook tonight?
Yeah, I wouldn't be too confident in him, but like, you don't have to be that confident for 200 and probably relatively low ownership, you know, relative to any other receiver. My only concern is that because he's literally been inactive, that we could just see like Colin Johnson over him, or them just stick to a clear top 3 wide receivers and he doesn't take the field much. But honestly, if he plays 20% of the snaps, that is still a fine play at 200. So.
Yeah, I think he's definitely like an intriguing play because, like, usually when a guy's 200, like, they're not going to play like more than a snap if you're lucky, like maybe a troll touchdown. Westbrook actually has some games, so I have some Westbrook. Let me just see real quick how many lineups I have him in. Actually, maybe like 20 lineups. So I think he's like a guy you can have 5 or 10% of maybe. But I wouldn't be surprised if, as you're saying, like someone else plays those snaps that I'm hoping that Westbrook will get, like Colin Johnson. So definitely a risky play, but he's 200. Let me check for more questions here. Any final thoughts when you're finishing your lineups here?
No, I think that covers it. I like the idea that like it doesn't take a lot for Didi to pay off, even if you're overestimating him at 40. If he's at 30 or 20, he's a guy you can pay off. I also wouldn't overlook James O'Shaughnessy as maybe seeing a bit of a bump in his role because they could just choose to run 2 tight end sets more. So I don't hate him either as we come close to lock or at lock.
That's a good point. Yeah, when a receiver is out, sometimes the teams go more 2 tight ends, and Jacksonville, it looks like they do that a decent amount because last game their 3 tight ends totaled to more than 100% when it comes to routes per play. So that could be a good option with O'Shaughnessy kind of being the sneaky benefit of the Chark inactive. So one final thing I want to throw out there is like if you played that Monday to Thursday slate and you weren't paying attention, make sure that you swap out DJ Chark because you never want to get that 0. I ended up going to a lot of Devontae Parker and Preston Williams. All right, let's see if we got any more questions here. Was there anything that surprised you about your lineups when you put them in?
I will say Jacksonville defense. I'm scary excited about them because, like we said, the range of outcomes on any given Ryan Fitzpatrick throw is pick 6 or sick bomb touchdown on an awesome rollout. So I'm gonna be uncomfortably excited about Jacksonville. Apparently.
Yeah, I mean, this actually should be like a pretty interesting game. I mean, you got 2 up-and-coming teams, if we're being nice, I guess. So,
yeah.
How do you feel about leaving salary on the table? Because Kanoa's dad in chat said he left up to 7K on some of his lineups.
Yeah, I'm quite comfortable leaving multiple thousands on the table. And I would say on a slate where there are tons of studs and I project there to be a lot of scoring, if that scoring is going to go to the studs, I'm less comfortable. And I think I saw this in winning lineups too, that the higher the totals were, there's a slight correlation to spending more salary being in the winning lineups. This game does have a bit of a high total, but I also think it's unique in that it's not going to feature Michael Thomas and Alvin Kamara and Drew Brees on the same team. It's featuring a top receiving unit of Keelan Cole and Laviska Shenault, which you don't have to pay a ton for those guys, and you're like really getting a very spread out market share. So despite the fact that generally when the total is higher, there's a slight correlation to spending more of your salary being beneficial. On this specific scenario, because it's so spread out, the difference between Chris Conley at 2,200 and Laviska Shenault at 66 it's not a triple difference, obviously. So pivoting down, I think a lineup that spends, let's call it 48,000 and gets Laviska Shenault is almost no different than a lineup that spends the extra or the less 4,000 to get Chris Conley. The difference between those guys is minimal. It's not nothing, but it's minimal. So that makes me feel even more comfortable leaving some salary on the table.
Yeah, definitely. I think that you can make some lineups that are pretty good. I'm looking through my lineups on DraftKings, and this one I have, it only used 42.3K out of 50K. And I had a couple of those wide receivers that are real cheap. Or well, I guess I had Isaiah Ford. He is 3K. I mean, that's the guy that he's just way underpriced. So the one caveat is that this is only a good strategy, I think, in that one tournament that has 300K to first with like 180,000 people because dupes are such a big factor. But you can usually improve your lineup with that extra salary in other tournaments. So how does your strategy change a little bit based on like the tournament you're entering the lineup in?
Yeah, in any sort of, like you mentioned it, any sort of smaller tournament or obviously cash, it is generally beneficial. Like NFL is a random game, but prices are still efficient to an extent that you're trying to spend most, if not all of your money in like cash. And I'm still leaving some money on the table. Like I'm rarely building, even if it's just like the $3.20 max or whatever, I'm rarely building a lineup that uses every single cent of the salary. But I'm not going quite as out of my way to make sure that I have just single or as close to unique lineups as possible. And those slates, I am much more of those tournaments. I'm much more comfortable spending a majority, a high majority, obviously, of the salary. I don't feel the need to leave 8K on the table just because if that's the lineup that wins, I want it to be a solo win. In anything other than that, 300K to top, I'm still trying to build optimal lineups to an extent, and that typically means spending most of the salary.
Yeah, definitely. Like the further away from, the larger the field, like the further away from the optimal lineup you can venture, basically, because like one of the tournaments that I entered on DraftKings had 176,000 people, but then they reposted the tournament after it filled and it had 17,000 people. That just means like every single lineup's going to be owned 1/10 as much. So it looks like we got the games kicked off. So Kyle, any final thoughts?
Let's go Jags defense and James Robinson. Let's get a nice correlation play from those two, because it sounds like those are going to be some of our favorite guys for the night.
Yeah, I love to see that. So let's hope some defense can get through here, and maybe some guys that have played a lot but haven't gotten the production yet this season. That's always what I'm hoping for. But hoping for an exciting game. Guys, thanks for supporting the site, for supporting the stream. If you're not already subscribed to the channel, hit that subscribe button and make sure to check out Awesemo.com. Thanks to House Advantage for sponsoring us, and good luck.